Thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Paul Grindall. I'm the sales director here for Biocair for the UK and Ireland. And really, supply chain seems like a dirty little secret, I think, a lot of the time. It's the area that people don't really think about in the process. I think as Tony just mentioned, you guys work extremely hard developing medicine, developing new research models, all the developments that happen in the space, and then don't really think about the supply chain at the end of it, which, to be honest, can be a significant limiting factor in the development of any organisation in this space. But a little bit about that and about Biocair. So 35 years of experience. We actually started in Cambridge as a humble bike courier, transporting material from lab to lab across Cambridge, and have grown since then to be a global organisation operating in over 160 countries. We are a specialist in that sense, so we move full temp controlled material and handle a lot of the customs activity, which we'll come on to shortly. What do we think the scale of the market looks like, and what are we seeing in the specialist logistics landscape? So in 2020, market was valued at around 221 billion. We're now talking about 2028 getting up to 647. So it's a huge market. It's a lot of moving parts, literally, but it is a real challenge for a lot of organisations, and something that shouldn't be underplayed and underestimated when you're thinking about your approach. If we think about COVID, and I think we've all seen supply chain impact through COVID, whether that was trying to get something delivered to your home mid-pandemic or just trying to operate. COVID caused huge disruption to the industry. There were huge limiting factors around transport, moving time and temperature sensitive materials, new solutions as well. Thinking about COVID was probably the first time I'd seen in my time in logistics chartering aircraft to move product. We had companies and some large pharma organisations literally chartering full aircrafts, paying the entire flight, the cost of the plane, the pilot and everything, to get their material from where it needed to go, where it was and where it needed to be. And what did COVID teach us? It taught us risk mitigation and the importance of risk mitigation. That's never more prevalent in supply chain. Gone are the days of companies working with one supplier. Every company I know now and I work with now has at least us and another. You would be mental not to have multiple supply chain partners in your organisation. But it's all about how do you choose the right partner and what should you look for? These are some of the questions that I get asked a lot when we speak to customers, and we just wanted to shed some of the lights on some of those challenges today. But again, looking at the market, it's a real mix, but the majority of material moved is still bio. We're still seeing bio being the core material moved across the logistics network globally, and dry ice still plays a huge part in shipping. I think there's a sustainability question around dry ice in the long run. However, and there are new packaging systems being developed to support reusable systems that don't require dry ice. I don't know if anyone here in the room ships dry ice or has ever tried to ship dry ice, but when we had the carbon dioxide shortages, global shortage of dry ice overnight, again, these are challenges that needed to be addressed and worth bearing in mind when you're dealing with it. So when we surveyed both other industry professionals like myself and some of our customers, we identified some key pain points that we see regularly. So starting at the top, temperature disruptions. Technology is improving. Packaging units and systems are getting much better. Validation times for units last a hell of a lot longer than they ever have done. But there are still risks in temperature deviations. Really, that's linked to the customs classification process. How many in the room can put your hand up to say you know how to manage customs in every territory globally? Don't all jump at once. But it is a nightmare, right? Customs is a real challenge. If we think about flight availability, off the back of COVID, we saw huge disruption in flights being available. Air freight prices went through the roof. If you tried to book anything through that period, it was extortionately high. Improper positioning of samples as well, and then lastly, lack of dedicated teams. So when you guys have a problem, when you're working with organisations like myself or any of our competitors, do you have people you can speak to? Have you got relationships locally that can give you that advice? It's not about moving a box from A to B, it's about making sure that you're getting that consultancy level support from your providers. That should be core to any decision you make, whether that's us, whether that's a competitor, whether that's a large freight forwarder. Make sure you've got that partnership built in and you're getting the value and advice that you need. But I wanted to focus on a couple of the real drivers for issue and some of the areas that you may come across, and if you haven't, or if you think you might, this hopefully is valuable to you. Trade compliance globally is a huge challenge. Really linking that to Brexit, I think Brexit saw the change to single market customs and then having to work with each country individually. If you think about now, trade compliance regulations are constantly changing. The EU as a bloc will set a directive, but then they will give autonomy to each country individually to make up their own mind in terms of the nuances of import for that market. So it's about understanding that and making sure that you've got people in your business and in your partnerships that you have with supply chain providers. Apologies, by the way, I just knocked it out of the way. Is about making sure you've got those partnerships and your supplier relationships that can really support that knowledge. There's no point having them if they don't. You're not expected, and you shouldn't be expected, to know the nuances of customs regulation in every single market in the world. Who does? It's impossible. Thinking about permits, licensing advice. What type of material are you moving? How is it being moved? Is the market you ship to one day needing a license, but a market the same product not needing one? Again, understanding those nuances is really important to making sure a right first-time customs approach. And then customs delays. The market surveys we've seen, they account for over 45% of shipment delays generally. And 32% of that, of the total 45, is relating to paperwork. Making your paperwork right, it's a very dull thing to think about, is customs paperwork, but it's so important. If you get it right, you'll sail through. If you get it wrong, you can see delays, and I know from personal experience in past lives, having to write handwritten letters to customs officials in gateways, begging them to let me have my shipment back, is not something I'd advise anybody to have to do. So how do we mitigate customs? How do we make sure you get the most out of customs and that you get that right first-time approach? Partner with an expert. It's really simple. Don't expect to learn and manage it all yourselves. Companies like myself and competitors in our space should be able to support you in this journey. Treat every country individually. As I said earlier with the EU, don't feel as though I'm shipping to the EU, so shipping into Belgium is going to be the same as France. It's not. And if you now look from a UK point of view, two of the markets in Europe that are really challenging off the back of Brexit are Spain and Italy. Germany went through a period of being quite challenging, sort of immediately after the Brexit period, but has got a lot better now. Whereas Spain and Italy, there are some nuances that we need to be aware of when we're moving material into those markets. The two really, though, that make the most difference are classification and valuation. We see a lot of organisations and customers undervaluing product, valuing it based on what they think it's worth or based on what the physical material is worth. Thinking about your valuation based on what does this actually mean to your organisation, what's the real value of that material. We see samples trying to get shipped at $20 or $10 or £10. Customs will flag that immediately. If they look at that commodity code that's been selected, the description that you've put, and a nominal value, it will be flagged, stopped and inspected. So make sure that your valuation methodology is correct and accurate, but also your partners should be able to support with that. If you give them the right information, the right advice, the right detail around your product, your partner that you work with should be able to help you classify and help you value the material. And destination pre-approval. Seems obvious, but why would you ship something to a destination without them saying they're okay with the paperwork? You're almost hoping and throwing it out there and hoping that it sticks. So make sure that any partner you work with and that you use is pre-approving shipments at destination before they even leave the country. That's a fairly fail-safe way to make sure that you're not going to come across any problems. And then the second area really is around capacity and route design. Another sort of significant challenge we talked about earlier around flight availability. COVID saw a lot of that. It is getting a lot better now in the market. I think flight availability is growing. There are more airlines spaces available now, freight cargo and commercial airlines. Even some of the commercial airlines now are starting to relax what they will and won't take on their flights. There was a lot of challenge in the past around moving certain levels of dry ice or liquid nitrogen or active temperature monitors because of the risk on a commercial flight. Those are being a lot more, a lot better managed and mitigated now than they were in the past. So flight availability is growing, which is great news. But connectivity as well, making sure that you have the right partner and the right airlines and the right organisations working for you that do connect you to the world. As previous speaker said, we are a huge market here in the UK that is continuously growing all the time. Now with that, there come challenges around connectivity, making sure that operational infrastructure, flight availability and capacity is all available to you. And again, your partner should be able to support with that. Ground handling, I think we've all seen in the news around Donata and some of the baggage handling situations in some of the airports. It's been a bit of a nightmare. That has got a lot better recently. There's been a lot more recruitment into that space, so we're not seeing the same levels of ground handling challenge that we once were. And air freight products. Are you choosing the right products? Are your suppliers picking the right temperature controlled products? Air freight isn't just standard general freight. You have tiered levels of air freight product. If you move a temp controlled material on a temp controlled air freight product, you get a much longer validation time on your shipment. So say you're moving a parcel that's got 4 days validation. If it's moved on general freight, you have 4 days from the point it's picked up. If you move it on a temp controlled service, it goes into hibernation during that transit. So you get a lot longer on the validation cycle. Again, it gives you more confidence that your samples are going to arrive and remain in good condition. And in terms of managing that capacity, so think about what are the options. What options are out there? Is your export gateway connecting you to the world? A really good example of this is Ireland. Ireland now being the second largest medicinal manufacturer in Europe. Huge CMO footprint coming out of Ireland. A lot of work going into Ireland from, obviously Brexit was a huge catalyst for that as well. But Dublin is a problem. Ireland has had all this investment and all these companies moved there, but their local infrastructure hasn't grown with it. So capacity and route design out of Dublin for air freight is almost non-existent. You see a lot of challenges with the material not being able to fly on the right dates and getting bumped from flights out of Dublin. Whereas Heathrow, moving something out of Heathrow is probably one of the largest airports in the world. Connectivity-wise, it connects to everywhere. Flight options are fantastic. Frankfurt's another one, Singapore, JFK, Chicago. These are core connectivity airports and hubs. So make sure that your partners are moving material in the right way that does connect you to the world. You don't want to be doing all this great work in the UK and then having it stuck here. Contingency planning. We always hope they don't happen, but always good to have them. Make sure your partners have robust contingency plans in place. If things go wrong, they've got backups. They're not just banking on one solution and one route design. They've got multiple layers of backup option and protection. And then product selection I mentioned earlier. Make sure that your partners are choosing the right products. You don't want to be in a position or in a situation where your material's temp controlled, 2 to 8, 3 days validation, and it goes on a general air freight service. You'll be in a position where that will spoil when it arrives in customs, and then all of that good work down the toilet. So these are simple tricks and tips that I'd urge every single one of you to speak to your supply chain partners about. And just to leave you really some of the core questions that we would share with you guys to make sure that whoever you work with, you're asking these questions of your partners. Do they have contingency plans in place themselves? Can they support your paperwork and classification advice? Really, really important. If you can't get paperwork right, you'll get customs wrong. Very, very simple. Does your partner provide that support and advice? How much visibility do they offer during transit? Have the packaging solutions been validated? And do they work in advanced therapy CGT? As I said before, it's a dirty little secret. Normally, not many people want to talk about it, but it plays such a huge part in all of the good work that you do. Why would you risk getting it wrong? Thank you very much, and open up the floor to any questions.
Any questions from the floor? Do you want to all talk about logistics? We've got one over here.
Hi.
Sorry, can you just wait for the mic to come and then we'll pick it up on the recorders.
So as a logistics expert, could you tell us a little bit more about what your company does in terms of sustainability and also reducing your own carbon footprint?
Yeah, absolutely. So sustainability is a huge part of the industry, a lot more now than it was. I'll be honest with you, I think sort of 5-10 years ago, sustainability wasn't really on the agenda of many global organisations for logistics. The biggest areas for us are packaging. There's a lot of single-use packaging in our industry. I think there's an ownership on our side to make sure that we're using more reusable units, but there's also an acceptance needed from customers and organisations that it's going to cost you more. So there's a trade-off here between everyone wants sustainability, but there's a price to that sustainability. Air freight is something that a lot of organisations, air freight providers, large forwarders like DHL, Kuehne+Nagel, these guys are doing huge carbon offsetting schemes now on the air freight. I know there's trials at the moment in the US domestic market around electric planes for cargo only. Don't think I'd want to get in a passenger electric plane just yet, but cargo only. And they're also looking at sustainable jet fuels. So there's a lot of work being done. Is it quick enough? Probably not. But there's a lot of pressure moving in that direction. I think the one thing that any of us can all do from a logistics point of view, we can't control flights, but you can control what box you put it in. So if there's a drive on sustainability that any of you take away, controlling your packaging stock, supply, and whether you use single or reusable will be the way that you'll see the most gain.
Or to see on your last slide that you do cell and gene therapy transport. Now there must be special considerations here.
Yes.
I don't know how much time you want to spend on this.
It's a part of our business that's grown quite quickly over the last 5 years. It's a hell of a lot more complex. So whenever we move any form of advanced therapy, there are long periods of consultation with clients. Route design is extensive, so we look at multiple transit options. We have contingencies for every single touch point. So if you're moving something from one depot in the US to, say, the UK, that may need to move on 2 flights and have 3 vehicles. We will have to have contingencies for every flight and vehicle option. We'll also have to have contingencies for packaging and repack of material. So if it's LN2 and we're using Dewars as an example, we need to make sure stock is appropriately positioned in touch points. So it depends on the size and the scale of the requirement and what type of advanced therapy we're moving, whether it's commercial product, clinical product, or preclinical. But we take a long time on CGT product. It's not like normal material. It is expensive to move logistically because of the amount of contingency solutions you have to have in place. You basically have to have drivers, vehicles, and air freight on standby, whether you need them or not. So that will drive the cost up. I think we're seeing advanced therapies grow. I think there's a long way for it to come before it's a huge part of our business. And that really is aligned to the cost of the therapy itself. I think as that cost starts to come down over time and with future development, we'll see that grow in our organisation as well.
Paul, thank you. I'm sure you'll be around for the networking.
Yes, I'm here. So just for everyone's, I've got Gary, my business development director. Give a wave, Gary. Laura, our account manager, and Manish, our chief commercial officer, here today. So feel free to grab them at any point and ask any questions. I know Gary's itching for questions. Thank you very much.